In this lesson, we're going to add business logic to our controllers. In previous material, we've seen how to add simple create, read, update, delete capabilities, or CRUD capabilities. After the router has determined which controller to use for a request, the controller is responsible for making sense of the request and producing the appropriate output. In Rails, Action Controller uses smart conventions to make this as simple as possible. A controller can be thought of as a middleman between the models, the data, and the views, the interface. A controller can translate the model data into the user interface, and it can also handle user input to update the model data. Most applications start to get behavior that's more complex than CRUD capabilities fairly quickly. You may need to send an email after a user is created. You may need to ensure that when a user archives a photo album, all of the photos inside the album must also be archived. A photo album resource might have to handle adding photos, archiving the album, and renaming the album all via the update controller action. These unique updates start to grow their own rules as well. We refer to these rules as business logic, your app's behavior that isn't necessarily part of the standard CRUD operations. The update action for a controller is a common place for business rules to develop. We start with simple CRUD resources, and soon we develop features that add layers of rules on top of those basic interactions. Let's follow along with a theoretical action over a series of features. We'll start with the simple controller that handles the matches for a company ping pong tournament. With our current design, scores are updated via the matches controller. And when a match finishes, the scorekeeper must then also mark the match as completed separately by submitting another update action that marks the match as finished and sets the winning team. The scorekeeper must also separately update the bracket resource, a separate controller and endpoint, to let it know the match has completed so that it can move the winning team forward into another match. Our product owner wants us to add an automatic match finisher feature. If a team reaches 21 points, instead of requiring multiple updates, the product owner wants us to automatically mark the match as finished and set the winning team. We can remove the call to update and instead assign the match params to the instance of match and check how to proceed before saving the model. Assign attributes will set values on an instance to the params we pass to it without actually saving. It's kind of like calling new to initialize, but with an existing record. So we'll add logic to handle the case where the away team reaches 21 points or the home team reaches 21 points, and update the status and winning team ID attributes accordingly. Notice implementing this feature has introduced a lot of additional code to the controller. We are still ultimately handling the request, reaching out to the model and rendering views, but the code's very different than the other controller code we've seen so far. We've started to add rules to the controller that don't really fit into its responsibility. The first sign that this is happening is if you start to see conditional statements that aren't tied to querying or rendering, specifically this conditional. It isn't making decisions on what to query or how to respond. It's asking the model for information. It's calling away team score and home team score, and then telling the model what to do, calling assign attributes with specific status and winning team ID values. This is indicative that you are going beyond the responsibility of the controller. A big problem with placing this logic in the controller is that it makes it harder to test, and that this complexity is likely to grow, as we'll see in the next section. We've started innocently enough with a simple conditional statement, but now we've realized that we were automatically finishing matches before they should be. The rules for ping pong say that the first to 21 is the winner, but they must win by 2 points. So we need to alter our condition as our next feature. Additionally, the product owner wants us to send emails to the organizers when a match has ended. As you can see, this one controller action now contains a lot of logic, and it likely is continued to grow over the life of our application. Our product owner is already writing features that involve updating the bracket automatically and setting each team's wins and losses whenever a match is completed. The conditional statement is already incredibly complex with lots of branches and is locked inside of the controller action, so there's no other way in the system to handle match completions. Our controller has become responsible for what it means to win a match and what to do when a match is finished. This brings us to the concept of the fat model and skinny controller. A common phrase you might hear in the Rails community is fat model, skinny controller. What does this mean? In summary, any non-response related logic should go in the model. The skinny controller remains a nice and simple interface between the view and the model. To put it another way, the controller should remain the middleman between your data, the model, and your interface, the view. Let's use a simple example to see how this fat model skinny controller concept can lead to refactoring your logic code. What if our match model handled all the complexity of checking scores and finishing a match? We could do this in a variety of ways, but let's take a broad approach and assume we wrote our own update scores method on the model, which will handle all of the additional code we've written so far. We can also add a finished method to the model to prevent having to check the status directly in the controller. Now the controller looks a lot like the actions we've seen before, with just the addition of the match completed mailer call. Our controller is back to being focused on finding the record and deciding how to respond based on the results of the record update. All of the complexity of the how to update was moved into the model. One additional benefit is that this will lead to drier code. Again, dry stands for don't repeat yourself. For example, if we have another controller action, or we want to update matches from Rails console, all of those interfaces can now rely on the model to provide that behavior. So now, on your own, you'll take the following example controller and modify it to meet the following requirements. 1. Use the assign attributes method to assign the match params to the match instance variable. 2. Use conditional logic to correctly set the match's status to finished and to set the correct winning team ID. If a save call on match is successful, render the match data to JSON. Otherwise, render the errors to JSON.